My name is Miha Sarai, I'm the gallery director. And before I pass it along to our fabulous associate curator, Ellen, for myself, I would like to take a quick moment to just acknowledge the Coast Salish peoples of this land and the language such as the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Duwamish, the Yala, Suquamish, Tulega, and Muckleshoot nations. I would also like to acknowledge the curator of the show. Unfortunately, he's not able to join us tonight, but Jay Gordon had a vision for Rain Village together with Sue, and I would just like to acknowledge his contribution and his vision. And without further ado, our incredible associate curator, Ellen.
Thanks, Miha. Nice to meet you all. Thank you all for spending your Saturday afternoon with us and support to our amazing, talented artists and teaching artists at the Brooklyn Arts Center. Before we begin our conversation, I'd love for our panelists to please introduce ourselves, the mediums that you work with, and also the courses that you teach here in Brooklyn. So would you mind starting? I'm deciding to take off my mask just so I can project a little bit better.
You can hear better. I'd be like grateful if you could take it off so we can hear you.
Yeah.
So my name is Sue Hong, and I've been working on this community project called Rain Village. And I work in visual art, painting, and installation. And at Brooklyn Arts Center, I teach abstract painting.
I'm Maya Sarita. I'm a visual artist as well, teaching artist. I'm ex-designer, illustrator, becoming an activist as well, and teach primarily drawing and multimedia, anything from graphite to pen, color pencil, charcoal, things like that.
I'm Rupa Palasamudra. I am a ceramic artist. I make functional work on the wheel, and I've been teaching at Brooklyn Arts Center next door for like 8 years now.
How about yourself, Miha?
And I'm Miha Sarai, the gallery director.
I'm an artist.
Hi, gallery.
I'm a teacher.
Yeah.
Someone shy. And I'm Ellen McGiver, and like Miha said, I'm the associate curator here today. I'm just really honored to talk and facilitate this conversation about such a personal topic, such as one's creative process and the people and places that help us along that journey. So thank you all for trusting me with this conversation topic today. Before I start with my questions that I have, I just want to briefly read the curatorial statement we have for Rain Village, just so we kind of get grounded in the exhibition that we're currently activating. So, how do you create home? Since 2018, multidisciplinary artist Sue Hong has pondered this question. Rain Village is a community arts project that brings together participants in conversation and creation on the topics of belonging and mutual empathy. Using the symbol of a raindrop, Sue invites patrons to participate in an example of social practice by creating 3D ceramic sculptures rendered by school children's drawings, interactive decals, and animations and illustrations, and with this interaction, completing a mural of a topographic map of the Kirkland area right behind you. As a guest of the gallery, you're encouraged to add raindrops to the map, as well as view artworks on display that were created in separate iterations of this project in Seattle, Redmond, Issaquah, and Bellevue. Without further ado, I'd love to hear a little bit about how you guys started your artistic journey and your artistic voice. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but I feel like one of the best conversations I've had at KC so far was you telling me about how you got involved in your creative practice. So can you please share that with us?
Sure. When I first came to this country, I was 24 years old, and it was a time when I couldn't work. So my husband kindly found places where I could spend time and get to know the community. So he asked me what my interests were, and I said pottery. I don't know why that came out, but I had been creative, but never artistic. I never saw myself as an artist, but we were encouraged to be creative people, creative kids. So when even before I moved here, we looked into all the studios, and because I couldn't work or studying was prohibitively expensive, I started taking lessons at a community play studio in Boulder, Colorado, because that's where I first came here. And then one class was enough to get me hooked. And recently, the reason I was narrating that story to Ellen was because we had a holiday art market here, and somebody came in and he was from that studio. I was super ecstatic to have met him after all these years from a place that was close to my heart and to a place that is still close to my heart, just like Grand Center. So no matter where we move to, clay people are my community. So we first find a clay studio and try to move close to it. That's how I live close, like 6 blocks away from here. So no matter, that's my grounding as a community. So my clay, my work, as well as the people that I've been associated with, who are clay artists, they've been awesome people. So my experiences have been really, really positive, and it makes me want to give back sincerely.
That story.
That's such cool.
Neha, would you mind sharing? Do you have any stories or inspirations or people that inspired you to start having a creative practice?
When I was a kid, I was not very social, so I would spend a lot of my time drawing and kind of imagining things. And I never thought of it as going to be a vocation. Plus, I'm from Slovenia, and at that point, there were no jobs for an artist. Artists, it didn't really exist as a vocation, so my parents were very worried what that would mean. So eventually I went to study business and worked, moved around a couple of different continents. And it wasn't until I was in my late 30s that my wife suggested I should go and finish my degree. And I happened to take an introduction to drawing class. And that changed my life. It was very much like Ripple Art Center. The instructor asked me what my interest was, and I said business. And she said, I think you ought to rethink that decision. And really, that's how it began. I find that it's just something that has to be done daily, whether it's drawing, whether it's painting, whether it's rearranging things in my studio to aesthetically kind of bring it all together. I think that that's one of the things that we all kind of think about is just, you can't stop, you can't help yourself, you just kind of do it. Sometimes I think I'm going to stop making art, but I can't. I find myself doing that same thing, so this is what we are.
What about you, June?
Well, I was always creative. I think that as a little girl, I used to make stuff. I used to love carving things. Somehow carving into sticks and making things with my hands. And drawing was definitely present there. I ended up studying design. I thought that would be clever and make a living, right? Be creative. That would work. Then I went into illustration for children's books, so I'm published. And then somehow I just felt I needed something else. And then when I came here, I also didn't work, right? At the beginning, that's where you can't work. And I just ended up doing what I was doing. And I just thought I would love to teach and I would love to kind of share my skills and share my passions. So a lot of my work also is about home, which is interesting how your exhibition touches on that. It's just the idea of home. What makes us home, what brings home. But that's another question for you. But it all kind of revolves together around the same topic. So, let's see.
I don't think I was always creative, but verbally I had a lot of handicaps. Because as soon as I was born, I was moved to US, and then 3 years old I would go back to Korea, and then we went to Italy. So in the class for 1 year, I didn't understand any Italian, and then we moved to England, and I have to learn English again. So most of the time I catch how people do things. Like if everybody stands up, I stand up. You know, when you're in the church, like you pretend you're singing, you don't know the lyrics, that kind of thing. So, but I remember clearly this one is like, I wanted to make friends, but I didn't know how to make friends. And I was doodling this rabbit, like a character, and in the kindergarten in Italy, the kids brought pencil, and then can we swap the drawing with the pencil? They were doing, just giving a gesture. So I felt comfortable making my own thing than talking. And what I had created, that could be a tool to communicate. So I think that's how I started. Eventually, even I went back to Korea, but I didn't feel like home. I felt like an alien as well, because having various culture around me, I didn't really feel rooted in one. So even visual, like all this images or surroundings is, I think it's part of inspiration to me, or it's a part of like for me to understand that surrounding. So the way of making things is how I understand it. And that's the way of creating different than I don't know that makes sense.
Art is visual communication, right? Like that's just, it's part of it. That's what makes it so special. Kind of piggybacking off of what I was talking about earlier, are there any like motifs or shapes or palettes that are synonymous with your home or your culture, your family that you use within your art making at all? Or are there processes from your home country that you utilize while you're making here in the U.S.?
Should I go?
Sure, feel free, yeah.
I don't really, I'm Korean, so I probably have a bit of Korean culture in me. But when I'm in Korea, I don't feel like I'm Korean as well. It's kind of awkward. But I did calligraphy for a long time when I was a child. But when I moved here, I didn't really look back on this ink wash painting. Somehow during the COVID, I felt like just a desire that I want to learn again. And I picked that up and I started to do a collage using that Sumi ink wash painting in my work. And it was kind of strange that when you're away from your hometown, you have a fresh shot to look back at what you originally had. So that was something I think that I felt.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like when, we move to different locations or we like start different chapters in our life, it's almost kind of like an act of rebellion from where we
Yeah, and then
come
when you want to go back.
Yeah, like we're not those people anymore. We're not the location in which we're from. We're so much more than that. And then we automatically kind of start gravitating because that feels comfortable to us, right? What about you, Maya?
And it also gives the distance as well. Sometimes you see things much more clearly when you have that distance. So when you step away from it, you actually can see it. Sometimes when you're in it, you don't realize it better. And it's something I had in one of my classes, we were talking about culture, and somebody says, but America doesn't have culture. Yes, America has culture. But when you're in it, it's hard to see sometimes. So it's interesting to think about that, yeah. And really enough, I find that I am influenced by nature and surroundings of where I am. However, I embrace the distance too. So I do like a little bit of a disconnect. So I'm not an artist who tends to work very well on location. I like to kind of gather my things, go into nature, find things, explore things, and then bring them into my studio. It's almost like a little bit of space to kind of just absorb it and internalize it and interpret it and make it into something else.
So in my work, just like Maya explained, we tend to maintain a distance. So in my work, I feel like I don't have any motifs or things that show up directly, but I can definitely say the process or my style of work has been influenced by my upbringing. Like when we were kids, painting inside the lines was a big thing, like symmetry was a big thing. So if something was organic, it wasn't good enough, right? So my style of working is that precision. And since I throw on the wheel, my process has been to gain the skill to make it precise, to make it symmetric, yet beautiful, right? Yet beautiful. So my influences of home and my upbringing are in my process rather than the outcome.
Yeah, I remember when I was in undergrad, one of my professors asked me why I wasn't more specific in my cultural heritage in Slovenia, and I thought, because nobody would understand it. If I use motifs from there, like, who's going to understand what these characters are? And I remember he looked at me and said, but that's what's going to make it unique. And I thought, that's interesting. I never really embraced that, but kind of going from what you were saying. My dad had a very big collection of comic books. And there were reprints of old, like 60s and 70s Marvel comics. So I was fascinated with that precision of line and the contrast of line and white. And so eventually that's really what my work evolved into, these big paintings that kind of look like comic books, I guess. Because in a way it sort of connects me back to my childhood. Not so much locality, but more a place and time, time and place. But it doesn't form one's process.
And like with me, I would think when I think about some of your work, especially some of the work that I've seen that involves cultural icons, like the influence of Americana or rock and roll or pop iconoclasm. Like I do see influence of American culture in your work from time to time.
That's one of those things when you're looking at America from outside.
Yeah.
It's like, I remember when we first moved here, my wife said, we're going to go to California. And I said, I don't want to go to California. And she said, why not? I said, in my very limited knowledge of America, there were three things of America. New York City, Westerns, and like the crime of California. It's like, I'm not going to California. So, but it's really incredible how it informs your perceived world before you ever move there. And then that experience, you're like, oh my gosh, it's so much here.
So kind of what Maya and Michal were both speaking to, how does location affect your artistic practice? Like, have your communities changed over time and space as you've also expanded your artistic practice or found influences in other places or people? I know it's kind of a disjointed question, but I'm just interested in, if you were kind of speaking to the disconnect, but you're about to go abroad to go study and have an awesome artistic process. So I wonder if you can elaborate on that.
Well, kind of taking it a step back, I find that it also got to do with growing up. I think that when you're younger, you might not take notice of the community as much, and also your role in things changes. So I find that most of my life, I always like, what? The community? Like, I would obviously be in art school, I would be in things, I would automatically be in the community. However, I was never engaging with community. I was always the quiet one in the corner. And I find that maybe this, yes, showing old age, is that I'm, yes, definitely more engaged, more interested, want to create things, want to kind of be just, part of community. And that's very different. And looking at ways of how to connect people. I think that especially during the pandemic, that was really the kind of the grounding thing for me. It's just like, how do I reach everybody and make them feel connected, even though everybody's separate? So even though Peru right now, the project I'm doing in Peru is disconnected, I know it's just a matter of time before everything starts to link together and everybody can connect again. And we can understand each other's stories and we can just bring them all together.
You can tell the audience a little bit about your project.
My project, yes.
Yeah.
I'm creating an exhibition for an organization called Jungle Keepers, and it's to protect the Amazon forest. So it's the Peruvian Amazon. And I'm going there to do research, to look at the jungle, look at the adversity of the problems that they have, the gold mining, the burning of the forest, and also the hero stories, right? Because not everything that's happening there is bad. There are some really amazing people working on the ground, preserving culture, preserving nature, doing all those things. So I want to bring all those things to light, and I want to also maybe bring some of those indigenous tribes to light of their life and what their life is like, and connect it all together. So the exhibition will be about that, is to bring the awareness, educate people, connect people to nature as well. I teach primarily drawing nature, and I find that nature is really important to our soul, to how we connect, to who we are. And if there's ways of connecting artists, community, other people together around nature, I think that would be fantastic.
It's also amazing. I'm so excited to see.
I'm excited.
Yeah, I was excited. Sue, can you elaborate a little bit on this question in relationship to Rain Village and how you were inspired by your location to create this exhibition, this ongoing project?
So this project started very personal. So I moved here 4 years ago, and before I moved to a different place because you have a job, you have a place to stay, but here actually no job, no home, but we wanted to stay here. So it was like totally, we picked a place and we'll figure it out with my family. And so there was a bit of excitement, but anxious that whether we could stay here or not. So I started this painting called Raindrop Series. So the motif is a raindrop because Seattle is a rainy place. But at the rain, I just thought it's like a pointy roof with a house. I just thought that. And there, water element is always in my painting in some way. That my painting needs a lot of water and humidity, and the process how I work is not planned. I really just gonna do a splash and see how it goes, and that's my process. So that raindrop series, I found it was a record of like my daily life, like how my neighbor reacts, or how like what I observe something different, or something fresh, or something ordinary to everybody, but it's different. It looks different for me. And by the time when I was finishing this raindrop, I really felt like home. And I wonder, and I saw all these people from all over the place, India, like Chinese, Japanese. There were so many different people that I felt like, how will they make their own home? And when I passed by these homes, I could see like this, with the decoration, how they decorate their home. I could tell like what kind of country they were from. So and I started to think like ornaments, decoration, that's how they create home. But more than that, I wanted to bring something in that everybody could understand who lives in this neighborhood, which is rain. And I just thought like the rain is like are all individual, transparent, everybody's clear, just some are a little bit big, some are a little bit small, some are a little bit pointy, that we're all transparent. In a way it's unique, we're all different, but at the same time we're all the same, like same as human. So I want the motif came from there, reflecting all this concept of rain village. So it's part of like, I think this is how I work, same as I work very much in studio, isolated, just do my own thing. So there's a mural that everybody can just express their own thoughts. And this sculpture is actually from, I asked people, how do you think about home? And they can you visualize in a raindrop. So they drew a raindrop in a line drawing. Taking that line drawing, I used 3D printing technique. So these ceramics are actually based on each individual drawing printed in 3D printing. So yeah, so I think when I put them together, it just looked like a village. It was like, this is community for me. It's like, for me, I don't know, it's like, it's an invisible community. I know it's there, but Maya really engaged. I think I'm still in the step like, I want to be part of it, but I'm a bit quiet away.
Well, it takes all roles, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think that Rain Village really speaks to not just like the individual or like the micro relationships that the micro communities have, but the macro and like us as global citizens too, right? It's not just Washingtonians, it's us as human beings and a human race. Rupa, what about you? Throughout your chapters in your life, has your artistic practice changed at all? Wife, mother, teacher,
Yes, and speaking to the sense of community. Like before the pandemic, it was a physical community. Like that's when I guess it all hit us that we couldn't go talk to our friends. That's when it hit us how much we took for granted being part of the community was. And as immigrants, we felt that before, right? When we first left, everything that we knew, every connection that we had, and established a physical distance. And that was the first time I re-felt it. So going online was a means to establish a different kind of connection, but still establishing a connection. So I had very personal relationships with all my students. We were all very close as a community. And I felt like during the pandemic, when it was difficult for everybody, it was my job to make an online class work, even though it was for ceramics. How do you teach ceramics online? We figured it out. So it's like, for me, the pandemic brought out a need to not only be part of a community, but also to kind of foster a community. And social media gets a bad rap, but I feel like it's how you use social media that can either be to your advantage or not. Like right now, somebody can post and say, hey, I am raising funds for my kiln because I cannot have a living without my kiln, and it broke down yesterday, and I have an art festival coming up. I can donate, so my community reach has extended. So those are the positives that I'm seeing. And also, the pandemic has created within me a longing to give back as well.
The question is, how says my practice evolve?
Yeah, so like, I mean, you yourself, you're the gallery director of KC. Does that inform your art making at all, or is that switched a flip or anything like that?
I think those are two very different things. I think my art making is its own journey, and as soon as I feel like I work on something and I think about it, but as soon as it becomes like an autopilot, it's time to change. And I don't like seriality. I tend to work one-off and move on and explore different ideas and practices and materials. As soon as I get too comfortable, it's time to move on. But I think one thing that changed was during the pandemic, like establishing a community for my students. To me, that was really maybe even more important than teaching them how you do this, how you do that. You can figure that out. You can figure out holding a pencil like this versus like this. That's a different effect. But if they can build comfort within each other and save space, that's going to take them much further than learning how to hold a tool or what mark this makes versus what that does. And I think that I see that in the show, is this idea that, particularly when it comes to art making, I think nobody owns it. It's like a baton, like somebody passed it on to me. I carry it for our torch, and then I pass it along. So you kind of, first you come in looking for that guy who's going to pass you this information, I don't want to be gender specific, but like that father figure, somebody to pass along the info, and then later you're on the other side. You're looking for somebody to facilitate this information too. Somebody who's going to pick it up and take it further. Hopefully art grows in the process. That to me is, I really like what you were saying, that concept of moving in a different direction of art making, the philosophy of making.
I have one more question that I'm going to bring to the table, but I would love for the audience to please raise your hand if you have a question or comment about any of the topics that we've discussed today. I know this is a yes or no question, but I kind of just feel like it's important that you talk about right now. What are the ways in which you believe art can change people's minds or experiences? Does art make us better people?
Yes. I think in order to create art, you need to be vulnerable. To really create, honestly, you need to be vulnerable. And I think that when you have a community of people who are vulnerable together, it makes you better. I think together, collectively, we become better people. So, yes, I do.
Art is a lot about perception as well. So when perception or ideas differ, art has the power to bring together. Like somebody might create something that shows me a way of thinking that I never thought of it in that direction before. So yes, it has a way of revealing or making us all learn and be aware of a different way of thinking. That's what is attractive to me, and sure, I think art can change people's perceptions and ideas and lives. But art, the practice of art brings me great joy. It's like, I don't know how I could have lived without, touching clay, making things out of clay. It's very satisfying. And when I see a student who is enjoying the process, gives me great pleasure. Just watching them dig deep into it and making something out of it.
I think art absolutely changes lives. Right now. But I think it's also fascinating in this field that we're in, visual arts. It's the most sort of, it has this weird status that if you're, I'm not Julia Child, but I'll make a meal for my family. I'm not Chopin, but I'll play the piano and orchestra. But when it comes to art making, people think unless you're Van Gogh, why even try? And I think if it makes you happy, just do it. You don't have to you have to compete with this invisible piece. Just do it. And I think that once people let go of that, it changes lives. It articulates their drives and their passions. And it's not as secluded as it's kind of meant to be. There's a lot of kind of things wrapped around it, but I do actually think it changes lives.
Before you answer, Sue, I'd just like to make a little pass. I do think that's why it's so important to have these sacred spaces like the center, where education and accessibility and seeing work and being exposed to work that you never have the opportunity to see is so important. And it's really centered to our humanity in a lot of ways. We're not meant to be a hustle culture and to, sell ourselves all the time. Sometimes we're just there to create an experience and to share. And I think that's just as valuable, and it should be valued as being successful or whatever that means.
Art makes better life, I guess, yes. That's why art has been exist for the whole time since it exists. But I just want to say, art making and viewing art is kind of, I think it's kind of different things. So if you are a maker and you are the viewer, and for this exhibition I wanted to kind of merge those two. That you came as a viewer, who you have to create. And that's what I wanted to find, that art is not something separate. Like doodling or that mural with a pen is just really nothing, but if you put it and present it in a kind of a gallery space that everybody can look at your work, it gives you a different experience. So I want to find art is something not far away. This art is actually part of everyday life, and that's what I really want to kind of tell through this show. So in the beginning I said, Ellen, this is not my show because I haven't really done anything. The drawings are done by people and just use really different technique to present it. And what I did was just buying shelves, putting shelves, and placing them. And even the mural, you have to create the mural. So I'm just facilitating the space where everybody can create the artwork. Yeah.
You offered opportunity,
Yeah.
and you offered community engagement, and you did an amazing job. As you can see.
It really touched me when when I'm working with students or people from Issaquah, Bellevue, Redmond, all these places, they were telling their own stories to me, and that was the most fun part for me, because I wasn't really creating. I was just listening all the stories, and then people together, they were sharing stories, because they had to stand on the mural. It's a total stranger, and then they talk about, oh, look at your jobs, and then they start a conversation. So in a way, they are not stranger anymore. They can actually talk through what they created through art.
I think that's a very generous point to say, it's not your show, but I disagree. I think it is your show because you provide the conceptual frame. You set up the whole system. Without you, people wouldn't be standing by the mural drawing. So I think you do help. You're like a conductor. Others may be playing, but you're still bringing it all together. You still give it a form. You're providing some kind of matrix within which they operate. So I think you sell yourself short there.
Thanks for giving credit where credit's due. I appreciate that.
I think it's excellent.
Does anyone have any questions for our panelists, comments? Well, thank you so much for being here. Please do make your mark on the mural before you leave today. We really appreciate you supporting our artists today. Please come back soon. Thank you.